Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Asch. Today, we are going to be talking about innovations in transportation and help looking at the future of transportation.
ANDCURBMANAGEMENT.
What's going on and how's it happening? Today, we're going to look at how vehicles are changing with Jason from Telo Trucks. And we're also going to look at how parking and AI influence transportation with Nav from the company called YCurb. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Nav, do you want to start by introducing yourself and a little bit of background?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity, Jared. This is the co-founder, CEO, YCurb. What we're trying to attempt here is change the baseline narrative of how the curbs are viewed, how the curbs are used, and how the curb information is shared. Rather than calling ourselves just as a parking service, we are positioning ourselves as curb operating system, the operating system for the curb. And the idea is to digitize the curb and digitize the parking policies that are enforced on the curb, and hence create this digital twin for the curb inventory. And then from there, we implement all these possible applications from this digital twin, from this curb OS. And just to name few, one is a zero friction, zero hardware parking for the cities and the drivers. Another application is giving visibility to the autonomous vehicles about the curb usage or the curb legality. For example, how would an autonomous vehicle pay at parking meter? There's no way until there is some API feeding the curb legality to that autonomous vehicle, for example. And then another application is if detecting missing signs around the city, for example. If we have a digital twin, we have a state frozen for that city of their curb inventory. And then after every month or so, as you refresh the digital twin, we know that, okay, what infrastructure is missing or what infrastructure was vandalized or broken. These are various applications. We are able to do it because the narrative is not on whether it's a parking app or whether this is a specific application, but rather positioning ourselves as the curb operating system using the digital twin. And from there, being able to flexibly apply applications based on what the city needs. Yeah, just in a nutshell.
Great. And Jason, you are launching a new automotive company building trucks.
Yeah,
Do you
we
want
just
to tell us a little bit more about that?
got a little project, just automotive manufacturer. We build electric mini trucks, pickup trucks the size of Mini Coopers with all the same capability, utility as a full-size truck, really dedicated for work vehicles in downtown cities. Where, funny enough, I was listening to Nav just talk then, I was thinking, oh man, this could be really useful because one of the biggest things we're trying to do is park twice the amount of vehicles in the same amount of space. And that's really what matters for us here is how do we actually trucks build the infrastructure of the city. I live in downtown San Francisco. I walked down the street on a Monday, Tuesday morning, and the city street's just lined with pickup trucks. They're just building the infrastructure. As the infrastructure changes, it's more and more trucks. They're causing congestion. They're the number one cause of pedestrian fatalities in the US, which are an all-time high. And we think we can solve that without having to trade off the capability of having a work vehicle. Same payload, same interior volume, same towing capacities, but all packaged in half the footprint.
That's interesting, right? There was the quick tie-in there to improving curb management within the cities for both these vehicles by shrinking the size, by making deliveries easier, by automating some services. Nav, you put up 2 thumbs up while Jason was doing his intro. You want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very much aligned with what Jason just mentioned about the infrastructure, because yes, trucks, whether delivery trucks, commercial trucks, I think they are the backbone of the local economy of any city, right? Whether they are doing deliveries, bringing in logistics and supplies. And I think it's very relevant to what YCurb is doing, because for the trucks to do efficient deliveries, the availability of parking space, or let me put it this way, a zero friction parking experience is what the delivery fleet, the real challenge is. That how can cities provide a zero friction delivery experience, which means the truck drivers, for example, or delivery drivers, they simply focus on checking in to curb, doing their deliveries and checking out without having to search for parking spaces, without having to read the confusing signboards, without having to waste time on feeding the meters. The challenge is, how do cities offer this zero friction parking and delivery experience to the commercial fleets?
And there's a real financial implication with the lack of parking availability, particularly for trucks. When we talk one, like the obvious one is where trucks are double parking and getting tickets. And some of these delivery vehicle companies rack up thousands of dollars in tickets every year. Yeah. It's crazy. The other one that's a little bit less obvious is these commercial construction companies that have contractors, subcontractors driving their trucks into the office. There's a lot of legislation around once your subcontractor parks and starts walking to their job site, their clock starts. If they can't park right up next to their job site, then you're potentially adding 30 minutes for that bi-directional commute, maybe even that lunchtime commute to back and forth to their vehicle. That's real money out of pocket. That's an everyday occurrence. There's some real financials associated with this and having both a vehicle that's too big and the lack of availability of parking.
So true.
Jason, you're solving a problem for delivery and for size. The competition hasn't come up with this yet. Like Ford, which is the maker of the F-150 series, that the number one selling car in America for a long time. Where are you standing out in here, and what gave you the idea for this innovation that you didn't see the big typical manufacturer make it?
It's actually funny. This podcast recording happened about 16 hours after Trump talked about a similar topic on this particular thing. There's been two reasons why small, high utility trucks haven't existed. One is relatively obvious. There's been a big push for vehicle safety. And when automakers hear that they need to make a vehicle safer and withstand higher crashes, what they do is they add more material to the vehicle, make them longer and bigger and thicker and heavier. And all that stuff adds up. And if you look at like the Mini Cooper from the early 2000s, the Mini Cooper today, it's gotten about 12 inches longer. The Ford Ranger's gotten 50% larger. A lot of that isn't changed really much of the internal volume. It's just gotten to the point where you have added more bumper and more structure and more components and more airbags, and that just adds additional structure to the vehicle to account for the safety regulations. The second thing, and this is the one that's relevant to what was just announced yesterday, is the way that CAFE standards have been structured, fuel economy standards have been structured, the ones that were developed back in the gas crisis in the 70s, have been used in a way that's actually incentivized automakers to build bigger vehicles. And effectively how the CAFE standards were written is that the bigger truck you build, you must be doing more work, you're allowed to pollute more. They said, okay, automakers went, sure, I hear that. I'm not going to build a new engine. It only cost me a few millions of dollars to make a vehicle slightly longer. I'm just going to do that instead. Automaker just make the vehicles bigger to meet these fuel economy requirements. Now, what's interesting about just yesterday, Trump announced that they're going to repeal these CAFE standards based on size and encourage small vehicles. And he had a note to Japanese K trucks, which is largely what our vehicles are inspired by, which are the tiny vehicles that drive around Japan. However, the actual implications of the writing of what they've said won't have a big difference on car sizes, at least initially to start. But this CAFE standard has prevented vehicle makers from making a very small, like Japanese K truck that's gas powered, because it wouldn't meet those fuel economy requirements. Our specific innovations are, how do we build a vehicle that meets those safety requirements and also meets the needs of a full-size work truck in the tiniest footprint possible? In order to do that, one, we rethought the entirety of frontal crash safety. We effectively cut off the hood, started from a first principles physics approach, ignored the fact that we have two long arms that usually hug an engine, and restructured the entire mechanical engineering of the front of the vehicle to enable us to meet all federal motor vehicle safety standards without a long hood. And that's been a huge endeavor, a huge undertaking, has a lot of software componentry to it, a lot of AI componentry to it, but that's really a core innovation that we've developed. The second big innovation we had is, how do we package the powertrain, the force, the energy, the payload, the capabilities of a full-size work truck into the smallest vehicle? We took the best of electrification, because electrification has a really unique packaging kind of capability. We can put tiny little motors in the front and rear of the vehicle, but have a very substantial battery pack that's actually the heart and soul of the vehicle that will enable huge payloads and big towing and big capability in a tiny little footprint without the sheer volume of what a V8 engine would take up or a diesel engine would take up, which would disallow this particular form factor. We developed a battery pack that's 50% more energy efficient volumetrically than any other vehicle out there right now. And those two things together, the volumetric energy efficiency of the battery pack, the crash safety systems of the vehicle, enable us to actually build the smallest utility vehicle ever developed for North American markets.
Interesting, because you're talking about how the battery and that changing in technology has been a key in getting you to develop and be successful in building out the model.
Yeah, battery technology. We're not building another Me Too electric vehicle. It's just another crossover, another giant truck that's maybe 3,000 pounds heavier and doesn't solve any new unique capability. We're fundamentally building a mini truck, a work truck for cities. In order to do that, it has to be the smallest physically possible to be able to park curbside as many vehicles as possible. That is the fundamental requirement. With that in mind, the only way to do it is to take all this innovation that's happened in electrification, apply it to this category of vehicles that haven't existed before, and develop that and deliver it as unique value add to our customers.
I want to expand on that and stay with Jason for a minute. California, a lot of the cities, special government agencies, parks departments, water agencies, etc., all have requirements from the CARB, the Air Resource Board, to move to all electric or zero emission vehicles, I should say. And within that requirement, part of the biggest problem when I talk, and we've talked about it here in the podcast, is those agencies say those trucks aren't available. Here, you may have a solution for that. Can you talk about that in the context of the environment, those air regulations?
Yeah, California usually set the standards for air regulations for the U.S., and either the U.S. decides to follow them or not. But very typically, over time, they do adopt some of the California requirements. Right now, there's a lot of like Parks and Recreation, utility companies, general government agencies that have some level of stipulation and budget associated with acquisition of zero emissions vehicles. But it's been very like the automakers are pulling back a lot of their utility electric vehicles, especially with the kind of incentives being revoked from the government. It's been very difficult to satisfy those requirements. On top of that, I think that we haven't delivered any vehicles yet. We have 2 vehicles on road right now that are racking up test miles, that they're the vehicles that Jay Leno has driven and other people. And those are the vehicles that we're getting in front of people. But as we scale, we need to really take into consideration where's the low-hanging fruit on the commercial side, who has budget that doesn't have to go through long sales cycles because it's already allocated from their particular, whatever agency has allocated that budget, and really go after those people because they're the people that are clamoring for these vehicles.
Nav, I want you to hit on some of the air regulations. One of the biggest things in my mind from cars is the idling and looking for parking where your fuel efficiency in a non-electric car is the biggest. Your solution uses technology to help make parking easier, reduce that time.
Absolutely. That's the exact one of the many applications, as I mentioned, but this is the exact pain point we solved. And Jason, just FYI, one of our clients is City of Tacoma, right? We already have created the digital twin there. And one of the approaches that we are going to do in the future phases is once we have the digital twin, right? All the drivers who want to use curbs, commercial drivers, fleet operators, delivery vehicles, commuters, residents, the onboard YCurb platform, right? Using the YCurb app. And then this is where we change the core narrative, which is in the status quo, the drivers, they have to find a matching curb. If they're commercial fleet, they have to find a yellow curb or a green curb or white curb, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is the drivers, especially the commercial drivers who are running short on time and who have deadlines to delivery milestones to achieve every day, they don't care about these curb colors. They just double park or park wherever they find parking closest to their delivery destination. They are doing this anyways. What we do with our digital twin approach, we just simply get rid of all these curb colors and we let the drivers park at any parking space they find closest to their delivery destination, except the red curb and the blue curb. Red for the emergency vehicles, right? Police and ambulance, and blue is for the handicapped. Except these two colors, park anywhere you find parking. YCurb solution is GPS tracking the drivers anyways, and they automatically charge you and track and charge the drivers by every minute of curb usage. This way, the fleet operators or the drivers, they don't need to look for curbs. They park wherever they find parking, and then they get charged by a minute. This way, we reduce the cruise time where they are idle time or cruise time where they're constantly looking for parking, spending time just searching for parking. And then they simply check in, check out, pay by minute. There's no hardware involved, and there's absolutely zero friction.
I asked that as an environmental question, but on the hardware side, one of your value props is having cities eventually get rid of parking meters or parking machines at the end or 12 apps for people. And that makes the streets cleaner. It helps improve
Absolutely.
sidewalks where most of the meters are, which more deliveries are being done on sidewalks. There's a whole tie-in there.
Absolutely. And that's in the status quo, there's a huge friction between the curb stakeholders. One of the stakeholder is the city who owns and manages the curb. Another stakeholder, which I already explained, are the curb users, the drivers, the fleet operators. The problem is, in the status quo, at this moment, for cities, there is only one way to generate revenue, and that is hardware, whether it's sensors or meters, which means huge capital investment, that's CapEx, the RFP, the procurement cycle of months and months and sometimes years, and then once the meters are installed, then the OpEx, which is the maintenance, graffiti, vandalism, and whatnot. There's huge friction right there on the city side. Cities don't want to use it, but they have no other choice. On the other stakeholder side, which is the drivers, they don't like the hardware-based parking service solution either because it wastes time. They have to feed the meters and whatnot. And above all, I would say, there's no option to pay by minute. They pay for 30 minutes, they check out in 15 minutes, they don't get a refund. In the status quo, there is this huge friction because of this hardware-based solution, which neither party wants to use. Cities don't want to use meters, but they don't have any choice. The drivers don't want to use meters, but what can they do? This is exactly what we do. We create the digital twin, come in as a curb OS, get rid of this friction, and align both stakeholders in one direction, and hence getting rid of the friction.
I was just in Berkeley and we were seeing a play with my daughter's a musical, and it was also a Saturday of a college football home game. And so there was all these extra parking restrictions, and the problem became that time at the meters, the parking machines, for me to be there didn't allow me to, one, park close, and two, I couldn't stay as long as I wanted. I had to run at park. I paid for a half an hour, got the kids and my wife settled, ran back to the car, put in for 2 hours. During intermission, I had to run back, and it wasn't close. The parking wasn't available with the restrictions. I like hearing that you're creating a better customer experience in that as well. Jason, anything in what Nav was saying that you want to expand on and how you're seeing transportation shift and benefit cities and how they're doing their planning?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that in 15 years, every North American big city is going to look more like Tokyo than it does now. I think that we're seeing, like post-COVID, a massive resurgence of the city, big development efforts going on, at least in San Francisco. I know in Austin, I know in Seattle, we're seeing just massive amounts of money being poured into additional housing, especially the lower income housing. And there's a lot of infrastructure that's being put in place and candidly, with the way the transportation's moving, like we're seeing in San Francisco, in Austin, we're seeing autonomous vehicles starting to really proliferate. We'll see the autonomous taxi ride will be a very ubiquitous thing across the US. Public transportation has to adapt and get better. And micromobility had a surge back in 2019, 2020, but we're still seeing it pretty regularly. What's true about all that transformation of the influx of people, the influx of new modes of transportation is there's infrastructure that has to get built out, and trucks build infrastructure. and trucks are still the problem, and they're going to continue being the problem for the foreseeable future. When we chose, people ask us, why did you build an SUV to start, or a passenger vehicle, or a taxi? There's a lot of people that are innovating in that space, but they're leaving out the thing that's actually building the infrastructure that enables that innovation. And that's why we focused on this particular area. I will say, though, I can commiserate, Jared, with your story you tell. I mean, I drive a Toyota Tacoma in downtown San Francisco because I have a big dog and I go snowboarding on the weekends. My wife's a chocolatier and sometimes does pop-up events. And I just have a lot of memories of trying to join with her in one of her pop-up events, dropping her off, circling the blocks a few hundred times, and then just giving up, going home and getting an Uber back to her event. It's a significant frustration. In San Francisco, we have these really weird curbs too. Nav, I'll mention, I know you've lived in San Francisco, I'll mention it. But you see these driveways, and there's this, in New York, everything's standardized in brownstone size. You know exactly how big a brownstone is, and they don't have garages. In San Francisco, all these classic buildings all have garages. And there's this perfect space between garage, space for sidewalk, garage, and it's always the size of a Mini Cooper. And that's exactly why we built our vehicle, for that particular parking spot that exists so many times in San Francisco. I drive by and I just don't actually get the opportunity to go capitalize on because my vehicle's twice that size.
I think that's true, not just in San Francisco, but in a lot of the suburban cities. I drive a Ford Explorer, which isn't that big, but there's a lot of places where somebody parks slightly off and you can't go in. And I like that because you tied that in, Jason, to a business and how it impacts the economy in a local market. If you can drop off that person who has to carry all this material to their business, right?
That's actually absolutely. And then it's just, the stats are staggering. The size of vehicles has absolutely exploded. Congestion's gotten significantly worse. Commute times on average have gone up dramatically. The pedestrian deaths thing we talked about, bicyclist deaths, they call vulnerable road users. It's a catch-all for pedestrians, bicyclists, scooter riders, and what have you. And some of these things are even more grim, like the number of children run over in their own driveway used to be almost none per year, and now it's in the mid 500s every year. All this is just a result of bigger vehicles, more distraction, and poor planning.
I sit on the Walnut Creek Transportation Commission as a volunteer, and our goal as a city, and they're redoing their curb management program. We talk about 85% occupancy for parking garages and parking meters as a goal. And we figure out the rates based on that, how to keep moving cars, that somebody can always find a vacancy, but size of vehicle matters, parking management matters. If maybe you guys want to talk a little bit about that, Nab, you could first, and then Jason can build.
Absolutely. I think most of the cities we spoke to, they want to see the occupancy and the occupancy rate go high in their structures. They want the traffic to go into their structures, whether it's a lot or garages first, and then the footprint on the on-street. And I've seen cities that we are talking to invest more in their garages and structures as well, even if it means advanced technologies like sensors or cameras, or for example, our GPS-based geofence technology as well. Cities are willing to do that. They want to go that extra mile, all that to reduce the footprint from the on-street and move them towards to other structures. Yeah.
Jason, anything there?
Yeah, I started my career in semiconductor, actually working on some of the first radar and LiDAR chipsets that worked their way into autonomous driving. And one of the projects I worked on was around optimizing for parking garages. The idea is that when vehicles are autonomous in the future, that they could find their way into a parking structure and go park themselves, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. One of the big challenges we had with doing that project was the sheer size of vehicles. Trying to park an F-350 crew cab 8-foot bed into a parking structure was near impossible. I personally think part of the problem that we're trying to solve is that having one small vehicle doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but having thousands of them does solve the problem. I remember doing the math, and don't quote me on the exact specifics here, but if we lined up every single truck in the US together, it would take it would take up the entire greater Los Angeles region of vehicles parked. There's just so much volume we take up and steel that we move around in that we only use 5% of the time of its life. The other 90 to 95%, it's stationary. And we need to do better at the amount of real estate we take up. both from a structures perspective and from a curbside perspective.
I want to hit on autonomous vehicles because you both mentioned that and how that's shifting thing. Jason, are your trucks going to be autonomous? What's your plan or your timeline on that to start?
Yeah, we have, what I've learned in my time in the transportation world, I've worked with many, was part of a major tier one supplier for autonomous vehicles and for driver assistance systems. I developed the validation for a lot of these vehicles. The truth is the hardware itself, now brings up hardware. The hardware itself for the autonomous vehicle, the camera sensors, the compute nodes, the LiDAR, radar sensors, the little chips that go on them, they change every year. It's hard to forward protect for the future of autonomy by installing physical hardware in their vehicles. I think it's a mistake OEMs make OEMs being automakers make by putting a camera in that's been designed 5 years ago into a vehicle that's coming out this year. And now they're 2 generations behind in what's possible to do in autonomy. By the time someone develops the autonomy stack and the capability there, your camera sensors don't work with it. Your radar sensors don't work with it. The amount of compute necessary to actually do the autonomous portion doesn't actually work. What we've done is we've protected for the areas we know that the autonomous sensors and compute are going to go. We've protected for them from a energy consumption rate. And we know that's a path that we'll go into, specifically for applications where maybe you drop off a workload and so a worker has to go work on their job site, press a button, vehicle goes find parking. That's the application I see as being the low-hanging fruit for us in this particular workspace. And maybe you could work well with YCurb and say, hey, push a button, goes to the YCurb API, goes find the parking spot available, and it gets its ass over there.
Yeah.
Very cool. But we do not have an autonomous vehicle today. We have the driver assistance features that enable us to get a 5-star crash test rating, but we are hardware protecting volumetrically for where we think those sensors and compute will go.
Nav, do you want to take the autonomous vehicle question?
What I've learned is actually cities are not ready for autonomous vehicles, which means what I mean to say here is, although they know that autonomous vehicles will be everywhere soon, right? The advanced vehicle for deliveries or other operations, but still cities are still not preparing for that future. That's what we learned, right? Now, yeah. And that's the hard, I think that's how probably how bureaucracy is always behind the technology. And that's why the solution we are developing ahead of time is for autonomous vehicles. And actually, it's not only for autonomous vehicles, but for all kind of fleet, where through, like Jason just mentioned, through API to API integration, we deliver the Curb digital twin to any vehicle through the APIs or right into their driver's dashboard also through OEM partnership, right? This way, they know the curb legality, they know the parking, where are the parking spaces where they can park. And if we have a B2G contract with the city, then we can also automate the payments as well, whether it's an autonomous vehicle or a regular vehicle for that matter.
And it's just looking up the stat. This episode should come out in early January of 2026. And at that time, Waymo will be deployed in 14 cities in the US. In red states, in blue states, in major metros. I also see them expanding into suburban areas here in California, down on the peninsula and whatnot. These aren't so far off anymore, right? They're probably the leader in the deployment over anybody else, but I think it's worth noting that cities like this isn't 15, 25 years off in the fantasy. Like, these are being deployed in major cities and suburban areas today, and will keep growing at a very rapid pace. Jason, if you want to build on that first and then.
Yeah, Waymo's definitely got a fantastic heads up on a lot of people right now. That's for sure. I ride in Waymo fairly frequently here in San Francisco. And it's pretty incredible to just see them navigate complex traffic situations. And it just goes to show you, when you put 12 years of some of the most top dollar people on a project like this, you can get it done. We're coming out of a drop disillusionment. I think what's interesting too, one of the ones I'm actually really excited about, as I just mentioned, and I'll give them a nice little plug, but I'm really excited about Zoox. I think that their deployment's coming, and maybe by January, they will have some ability for the general public to use their vehicles. Right now, it's for employees and families. If you've seen these vehicles, they look like little toasters that drive around. And it's what I envision the future of autonomy to be. And one thing I really love about the Zoox vehicle is it's 143 inches long. It's exactly the space it needs to be to serve its exact purpose. And that's actually shorter in length than our vehicle, which we consider which if our vehicle is available on the road today, would be the shortest vehicle available on the road. This is the size of the Chevy Spark. If you remember that vehicle that was discontinued a few years back, it's just the size of a Fiat 500. It's pretty incredible that you have a comfortable taxi cab that can sit 4 people, that can operate forward and backwards, that can navigate its way out of very complex traffic situations into very narrow spots that needs to drop people off. Like, that is the future I'm really excited about.
And Nav, do you want to continue down this road about what you're seeing in the AV space and how quickly it's coming and changing?
Yeah, absolutely. Neuro and Zoox, great example. And just to get into specifics, there are 2 fragments they are working in. One is the passenger loading, offloading, so passenger delivery, and then the other is the groceries or the goods delivery, right? Passenger loading, offloading is relatively faster, quicker, and shorter on the curb usage rather than the delivery side. But irrespective of that, both these autonomous vehicles and the cities, they need to reach a consensus that how well are they going to regulate and monetize the curb usage. Right now, there's so much of gray area, right? For Waymo or Neuro and Cruise cities are still struggling to figure out how to charge these vehicles or the autonomous vehicles. And then another use case is the same delivery vehicles, autonomous vehicles in the airports, in the arrival departures, right? And again, there are gray areas, how cities are going to monetize these when the Waymo, for example, goes to airports and the passenger loading, offloading at the arrivals and departures. All these are the gray areas that cities and these companies, they need to iron out, and potentially could be an opportunities for companies like as well to streamline the technology.
Well, and those are all good points, because if you're Waymo, if you're Zoox, where are you dropping people off? They're out of traffic and you're not blocking the cars behind you, because if they have to pull into the left lane to go around you, if you're slowing everybody down, if somebody's missing a light.
Not just the cars behind you, though, but one of the really big problems we have in San Francisco, where people are actually struck and killed in crosswalks, are when a car is actually pulled out into that crosswalk area on the side and blocking the visibility for what's happening on the left and right-hand side. That's actually, they're actually talking about pulling those little red zones near a crosswalk in San Francisco. They're talking about pulling them back even further to allow for that visibility. But I wonder if that's actually going to be now where more like drop-offs are going to happen, and that's going to even just negate the whole problem.
Yeah,
Something we've got here.
That's important. And Nav, it sounds like you're helping to try to solve for that as everything.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Yes.
And I think you're right. You talked about the airports in that might not affect the trucks, but the cities make a ton of money by charging Ubers and taxis and Lyfts and everybody else in that ride space.
But that's a flat fee. It's a flat fee.
Going to the airports.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's revenue how does the autonomous vehicle pay for it? Jason, I want to pivot now and come into manufacturing. We've seen that manufacturing a new vehicle, most recently, I guess one of the best examples is Tesla, but what are your plans for manufacturing? It's not easy to build out facilities to create that. You're talking a lot of job creation. Enlighten us.
Yeah, I think on coined it what do you say? It's the manufacturing hell, or get stuck in manufacturing hell. I think that what people miss in that topic is that manufacturing is difficult, but the U.S. has been doing it for a long time. And we're quite good at a lot of pieces of this story. Building vehicle bodies, building interiors, building compute nodes inside of a vehicle, wire harnesses. We're really quite good at this. In the areas that we're quite good at, we leverage heavily the industry that's been around for a long time. Our body and whites are made by, which is the metal structures of the vehicles, are made by vehicle makers that have been doing it for 100 years because they're really damn good at it. Where this new technology innovation that is happening, that is making manufacturing hard, that's what we do in-house. Namely, that's battery packs. We build our own battery packs in-house at our own manufacturing facilities, and we scale that ourselves. But I want to correct one misnomer about that whole story. There is a graveyard of electric vehicles that came before us. We're hyper aware. We've seen, I'm not going to list them out here, but at least 40 companies over the last 25 years that have folded trying to build electric vehicles at scale. but a lot of them didn't actually get to vehicle deliveries. Some of them did, but a lot of them didn't. And they spent $1 billion to not even deliver vehicles to anybody. And that's because the validation component of bringing a vehicle to market is really harder than the manufacturing component, because the validation component requires you to get to a vehicle that's done before it ships to a customer. And getting to that state in vehicle building, it just, if you don't know what you're doing in that space, if you don't anticipate the right things, you could end up spending $10 million here and $100 million here and $50 million here on every single mistake that's made. One of the big things that we're leveraging heavily is doing all of our validation 100% virtual before we build any physical hardware. Not only do we use physics-based simulations for every single element of our vehicle validation, but we even use AI-enabled simulations to do things that all automakers are not doing right now. To just get an example I'll give you is a standard crash test in a vehicle for a full frontal crash, which is like what you see online for crash tests. That could take up to 48 hours of compute time and 1,000 cores of energy to go compute virtually. We're at the state where we can do that quite well. But you can train models based on those crash test simulations to compute that same type of outcome to a 99.99% level of confidence in minutes. Like you can actually get an outcome of that same crash test in minutes. You can do 100 times the amount of test cases using some of these AI trained physics-based models to go do the validation. Every single component of our vehicle is based on that kind of philosophy.
You're going to put all the crash test dummies out of work with using AI to run those crash tests. I think that goes to the point of this episode. This is the future of transportation and automation. And that's a great example of how that's changing. Nav, do you want to add anything else on that?
I would say that these advanced vehicles, IoT vehicles, or connected vehicles, right? These are the future. Cities, the governments are not ready yet. That's what we have learned. The technology is always going to lead. And moving forward, frictionless, as long as the cities continue to provide frictionless experiences in their infrastructure. And when I say frictionless, which means as more and more autonomous vehicles are coming, to reduce the dwell time, to keep the dwell time minimal, reduce the idling time, that drivers simply check in and check out and waste no time on any distractions. As long as cities can keep up with the infrastructure that supports this narrative, that is where this maximum potential will be utilized, whether it's a city or the companies. That's the way forward.
Jason, I want to tackle something else you mentioned is all the companies that failed in your space. You guys have just raised a decent round of money to continue to start making production and continue further development. As you're doing that, as every startup looks to raise its next round, how are you approaching investors to say, we've learned from this, from all these mistakes of others?
Yeah, I don't think it's unique to us, but I think that my biggest recommendation for founders that are trying to raise money in a market that has headwinds to it, like our market, is to really stand out on your core principles and what makes you different. And one of the biggest things that especially technical founders like to do is they like to lean onto, we're 5% better in this, we're 3% better in this, we're X% better in this. And having a small percentage technical difference in a category does not make your fundraise successful. Having a market identification element to your story, having a go-to-market difference in your story, having a capitalization difference in your story, all at a really multiple, like your impact you make has a multiple X of change for your customer. Those are the things that really stand out. And the best thing you can do to prove that is to have your customers talk to these potential investors and say, here's why this makes such a dramatic difference in our lives. My biggest advice is talk to your customers, have your customers talk to your investors, and make sure that change you're making is substantial, it's undeniable.
Nav, you're, I think, out there raising money.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
I cannot agree more. As a matter of fact, the investors we've been talking to, they did seek references from our clients, the cities, and that interaction did happen. That's, I think, best way for raising money is when investors talk to customers. And for example, in our case, the city officers, they telling the investors that what is the value that YCurb is bringing to the cities, for example. Yes, I think that's a spot on.
And what's one piece of advice that you guys want to give to city officials looking at your companies or just the transportation space in general about solutions or what they should be asking? I don't know who wants to tackle that first.
I can go first. And mine is very, I would say, one-liner. Minimize the bureaucracy as to the least possible. That will help scale up the technology in the cities. And this is for the good benefit for the cities. This will be the best return of investment for cities if they can minimize the sales cycle, reduce the bureaucracy, whether it's political bureaucracy or the bureaucratic bureaucracy. That, in my experience, have been the biggest hurdle for the technology implementation. The change management is very expensive in terms of time, the time it takes. It could be because of some mindsets, or it could be because one of the significant efforts YCurb had to put was in the education, in explaining the benefits of this technology. Yes, change management is difficult, and bureaucracy simply adds to that delay. Yeah.
Jason?
I think that a lot of cities are doing this. I think it's not like necessarily I'm asking you to do something new, but like really get the core data and statistics around congestion and pedestrian safety and vehicle collisions, and understand the core kind of backbone as to why we're seeing the uptake that we're seeing. And because a lot of the times it's actually, we've talked to a few city officials that have been surprised when we've said, hey, did you realize that your pedestrian fatalities went from 200 last year to 400 this year and the year's not even over? Are you serious? Where'd you get that data? It's actually all available. Your other organizations have that available. And they're like, oh, did you actually realize that your average commute time for your constituents went from 25 minutes to 35 minutes in the last year? No, we didn't realize that. Having some of that data on hand and really kind of get to the bottom of it can drive a lot of really great outcomes. And I'm not saying that Telo can solve all those outcomes, but there's significant amount of like those challenges that we can really approach.
And Jason, how do people learn more about Telo Trucks and you?
Yeah, we have a pretty substantial online presence, both in online, our website, telotrucks.com, as well as our YouTube channel, Telo Trucks. We have a Discord channel that is, I think, twice the size of Rivian's Discord channel at this point, almost 1,000 active members on Discord that we give regular updates to. Myself, and our team members are always talking in. We're trying to be the most transparent automaker ever as well, because we've seen what happens when you get closed doors, pop up 5 years and the world's changed.
Nav, how do people learn more about YCurb?
We are actually strategically in a stealth mode right now, since we are filing for patents and in the patent process. But anyone interested, go to our website, fill up that contact us form and hit us up, and would love to give a demonstration. Yeah.
Great. I appreciate both of you being here, Jason and Nav. It was a pleasure, and great start to 2026 for everybody here.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared. And thanks, Jason, for your time here.
It was a great chat.
Great chat.
Thanks. Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.